All right. Well, guys, thank you all for coming and listening today. For those of you that I don't know, my name is Will Pittman, and I asked Donna and Howard Shuck and Dustin Saturis about being able to speak to you guys. And what the goal of the talk today is going to be is how to live your best life or reach your highest potential through intentional living. And I want to introduce myself to you guys. For the ones of you who don't know me, I was at the University of Cincinnati as a resident from 2015 through 2019. That last year I was there, I was one of the co-chiefs. And since leaving, I moved to Knoxville, Tennessee, where I practice just general practice anesthesiology. More importantly to me, though, I am a Christian, I'm a husband, I'm a father to two amazing kids. And over the last several years, my wife and I have really tried to figure out how do we live the best possible life we can, regardless of any external circumstances. But before we get into that, I wanted just to say really quickly, as I'm sure you guys know, the training you all are getting at Cincinnati is really awesome. So at the end, if you guys have any questions about private practice, I'm happy to answer those. But I still do hearts, neuro, vascular, basically everything except for trauma and transplants. Do all my own lines and blocks and staff a pretty busy private practice ortho surgery center where I'll do 35 to 40 peripheral nerve blocks by myself every day. So what you all are doing right now is really going to prepare you to pretty much do whatever you guys want to do when you are done. So the three main points that I want to hit here is how I stumbled my way through figuring out what intentional living was in my own life, how you guys can do that yourselves, and then some of the potential roadblocks that you may hit along the way and how to kind of transmute those fears or failures into more success. So as everyone always says, do as I'm telling you to do, don't do as I did in my own life. So I can break my professional adult life down into about three distinct visions. So at first, I really had no idea about the topics that I'm sharing with you guys, and I don't even know, if I'm honest with you, if I would have believed them when I first heard them. So when I got into medicine, it was pretty lackluster. I really excelled in school and high school and through college, but I never really gave much thought to my future. And this doesn't even just mean from a medical or professional standpoint, but I had really no idea on where I wanted to live and how I wanted to live, even if I wanted a family or what kind of living space or what I wanted to do with any of my stuff. And as vain as it was, my only passion at that time that was serving kind of any positive influence was that I liked lifting weights. And I'm actually going to circle back to that at the end of this talk to see how that kind of comes back around when you follow your own heart. But what I figured out was if I didn't define what I wanted out of life, I was allowing other people to do that for me. So just from, I think, well-intentioned family pressure, I was kind of told to pick a high-paying career, which nudged me towards medicine. I was in a relationship at that time that was pretty unfulfilling and somewhat volatile, but because I was scared to leave it, we ended up moving in together at the end of college and the start of medical school. And I fell prey to a lot of different things. So addictions such as drinking, partying, and other things that gave me a pretty tumultuous personal life as I was going into med school in Lexington, Kentucky. So as I'm sure you guys remember, as soon as you start studying with medical school, you realize that there is a ton of stress that comes with that as well. And so a couple months in, I felt this crisis of being alone and trapped doing this job that I potentially didn't want to do in a city where I didn't know very many people and had obligated myself to be financially for the next 4 years. And while that can sound like a sob story, I think this pain that I was going through is the wake-up call that I needed for me to live my perfect life. So really quickly before I jump off here, I've got this quote by Dr. Joseph Campbell and a YouTube documentary flagged by him. It's a great watch that kind of tells you about his life. This man was great at going through different kinds of human philosophy, but he talks about pursuing your life with intention and seeking joy in what you do. And I think as I started going through this, I realized I was unconsciously following the path that he states that all humans need to go through. He calls it the hero's journey. And as you all dive into this for yourselves, you'll realize that you're very well on your own specific hero's journey now. It just depends on what part you're in and how awake you want to be as you're going. So as we said, since I wasn't willing to define what I wanted out of life, I pretty much at this time was dooming myself to repeat variations of the same lessons over and over again. After cutting some old social ties and getting out of bad relationships that weren't serving me, I found myself sitting around wondering what the heck am I going to do with my free time while in medical school to try to de-stress and bring some happiness in. And as cliche as it sounds, I found CrossFit at the end of my first year of medical school, and more importantly, found a group of people who valued health and fitness in the same capacity I had since a young age of 13 or 14. So CrossFit became this sounding board for me to begin to dream about what I wanted out of life. I still had no idea what I wanted to practice in medicine, but I knew that I wanted to have a lot of time and energy to focus on functional fitness as much as I could. So this first attempt at planning ahead led me to consider some careers in medicine that had more shift-based type work. And so after looking at things like emergency medicine and anesthesia, I ended up finding this discipline in medicine that was pretty exciting to me. So as I started following this unique right path, wonderful other things started to happen to me. Because I got into CrossFit, I met my future wife through the connections I had at the gym. And just as a quick aside on that, my wife had actually been in a previous relationship that was not really serving her. And when she got out of it, she actually sat down and intentionally wrote out what she wanted in her dream partner. And so this was all very specific things on how they acted, how they conducted themselves in life, the kind of job they wanted, what their dream aspirations were with children. And while I don't know if I necessarily live up to all of those, she very lovingly states that I did. And that was how she kind of sought me out as well. So this is towards the end of medical school for me, and we quickly fell in love. But we're at the end of my fourth year of medical school, and we're kind of worried about the long-term success with this new relationship as we're getting ready to go through match and not knowing where I'm heading. So anyways, I followed my heart because I loved her, and I think that was some more unconscious dreaming on my standpoint. And so I rearranged my rank order and tried to stay as close to Lexington, Kentucky as possible. And once we finally matched in Cincinnati, we were still kind of nervous how residency was going to affect our relationship. But again, the universe kind of brought us together. And a month after match, we found out that we were pregnant with our firstborn Wilder. So at this point, we've started this new life together. So we're going to skip ahead a little bit into residency. And we found ourselves as a young family with 2 kids under the age of 2. My wife was super proactive about researching schooling options, nutrition, different kinds of clothing, and all these different stuff with our kids that she wanted to set up. But I had pretty much reserved myself again to riding her dream to the next stage of our life. However, she intervened with that, and we read a book together. And at Kimmy's suggestion, we came across this idea of a vision board. And what a vision board is basically just a tactile way for us to design our lives to try to maximize our time as a family back then. So in other words, what we were trying to do is figure out our dream as a family and how to accomplish it. And so this next slide shows a picture of our first vision board we made sometime in late 2016. Well, I guess early 2017, because my daughter was born early 2017. And kind of tried to design on this poster board how we wanted our family life to go. So we placed a picture of our family in the center, and then we thought of all the different decision trees that we would have to make and put them around the periphery. So I know it's probably hard to see, but we envisioned following areas like what my job choice would do to influence our family, our financial goals, our traveling and other purchases, what kind of home and property we wanted to own, our social network, the kids' schooling choices, my wife and mine and our family's health and wellness practices, and then our spiritual needs. And so by having this, it gave us a way to navigate through a bunch of life decisions and say, is this going to serve our family as a whole, or is this going to actually detract from us as well? And so since we did this, we came up with a lot of really cool stuff. So by making this vision board, all of this stuff on this bottom here with things that directly came off of it. So our goal for our job and lifestyle was to move to an outdoor-based town that had year-round activities, but that was still within driving distance of Lexington, Kentucky. So once we made a map or looked on a map and made a circle of all the towns that would fit that criteria, Knoxville was our #1 choice. And so we came down here and quickly fell in love with the town and decided that's where we wanted to try to get a job. I looked through what I wanted in a job after going through residency and figured out that I valued more time off rather than extra money, and wanted a more relaxed call schedule where I didn't have to do trauma or transplants. I know all you guys can commiserate with that when you have to do a liver transplant or something comes in overnight, you're not sitting down and not sleeping. So the first place I applied to down here in Knoxville, they seemed to on paper have all of those values that I wanted. And after coming, I really hit it off with them. And within 24 hours of finishing that interview, they had sent me a contract and I was beginning to sign to get that job. So as we started following our heart, I hope you see the pattern that as you make one decision that's positively benefiting you, you will start going down the path to make more and more for yourself. So now that we've locked in a job, we wanted to find non-traditional schooling for our kids. So my wife was really interested in our kids learning from their peers and having a lot of interactions outside of a normal classroom setting. I didn't want our kids to be sitting in chairs for 8 hours a day where they could get up and move and spend that time outside. And so when we were in Cincinnati, we checked out this Waldorf school. And if you all are interested or you have any kids and you've not heard of Waldorf schooling, I highly suggest looking it up. The school in Cincinnati is great. Unfortunately, they didn't have that here, but they had a Montessori school that was nature-based, that went from preschool through 8th grade. And so after we found that schooling and decided that's where we wanted to go, we started to look for a house. And looking for a house, even pre-housing spike, after all the stuff with COVID, was pretty crazy in Knoxville. Everywhere that we were looking, that people told us were the popular places to live, we couldn't find a house that we were really in love with, because what we wanted was a lot of land. We wanted to have space for our kids to run around and for us to do workouts and be outside a lot, but also on a budget. So we'd kind of set, $350,000 or less, because we didn't want to be house poor paying off our mortgage every month. And as soon as we sat down and took a deep breath and said, hey, we are going to spend most of our time driving our kids to and from school and me going to and from work, we expanded our search to, quote unquote, the less desirable parts of Knoxville. And within, again, 2 days or so, found this house. It was about 3,500 square feet. It was divided into 2 different big compound rooms. So there was a main living house and there was a detached garage that ended up having our gym, our kids' playroom, and a mother-in-law suite. And then it was on 3 acres of cleared land. It had 17 acres of woods in the back that were undeveloped. And Carl and Christina have been there before. It was just an awesome sanctuary for our family. But because we decided that we wanted to live in a place that valued our family, not in necessarily the popular part of town, we ended up finding this perfect house for us. And so while I would say that not everything in our lives were perfect when we moved to Knoxville, we had this very concrete dream in mind. And so we were able to sift through all these endless possibilities and relatively easily navigate these decisions based on our desires from that vision board we made. But as you guys know, life really isn't stagnant, and neither are we. And so after we kind of evolved and continued to grow here, we ended up outgrowing that vision board and made some changes. As COVID hit back in the early spring of 2020, I know you guys, the ones that were in residency, realized that, I know we had some reduced shift work. I found myself at home a lot too. I was working a lot less and had a reduced salary at that time, which was somewhat scary. And so Kimmy and I had a lot of time to talk and pray about what we wanted to do in our life and what we really wanted to value. And what we realized was that after we kind of finally arrived and acquired this material kingdom that we thought we wanted, we realized that that wasn't what was making us happy, but what was actually making us happy was the things that those materials provided for us, as far as time with our family, quality experiences, and keeping our health and wellness up. So as all this is going on, we are dealing with all the societal and social changes that we were doing in the pandemic. But we decided, as we're going to reevaluate our dream, we were going to consciously try to manifest our perfect lives rather than doing this unconsciously or without thinking about it. And so here were some of the things that we started working on then. With COVID, this awesome school that we were sending our kids to, they unfortunately began to abandon the philosophy of Maria Montessori as far as how they did their teaching and styles. I think out of fear of being shut down, and pretty aggressively started enforcing mask mandates and social distancing. We didn't pick our school as that was our end goal. Our vision for our kids was that they learned in this way where they felt surrounded by their peers that were loving. They got to be outside and move around, and they had teachers that were able to care and share and connect with them. So while there were a lot of parents that were struggling with if they wanted to send their kids back to the school and continue to pay tuition to go there, we pretty easily decided that the best thing for them and for us was to pursue homeschooling. And so my wife ended up getting certified to teach homeschooling for Waldorf education, and we have been flourishing with that. And because we listen to our hearts, not only is my wife doing well, our kids have been doing awesome through kindergarten this year. Throughout this too, my wife kind of realized that she had a big passion for helping families, and specifically helping women who had families with young children, live a life that was more conducive for health. And so she changed her career from doing insurance for 10 plus years, ended up starting her own business, which I'll plug at the end of this talk, where she does coaching for that, and has been really inspiring to a lot of people here in the Knoxville area and to other people online as well. We also realized that while it was fun to be in Knoxville, we also enjoyed a lot of time at the beach. And so during 2020, even with all the lockdowns, we decided to see if we could travel to the beach several times. And we went 4 weeks that year, and then 8 total weeks last year, and we have about 10 planned this year. Our family really thrives being out in the sunshine and in the water, and so we realized that if we can have the time to do that, we might as well take it as much as we can. And then the final thing I saw on here was we had a reduced salary that I thought was pretty well solid, because so many people are always having surgeries, and that anesthesia seems like a pretty stable career, but with COVID, that can potentially go away. So with the volatility of getting a paycheck potentially, and then seeing that our student loan interest rates had been paused, we made a goal to pay off all of my student debt, which was about $240,000. So almost to the day of graduating residency, we paid all of that loan debt off in 26 months. And then there's a couple other really big things that we're doing. We have to wait until mid-April or so, but we're going to announce those on our social media channels in about a month. So if any of this stuff has been interesting to you guys, I will be happy to plug that as well, so you can follow along with those. But what I want to say before moving on from this slide is I wasn't making a ton of money to go to the beach and doing all this stuff. So in 2020, I was grossing $250,000. And in 2021 grossed 350,000. And then this year I'm kind of capped at my salary at 425, which is much better than 250, but we're not making 7 figures here to make all these trips and do all these things. And so how the heck did we do this? We listened to God and to our own instincts and intuition kind of as opportunity was arising. As we kind of mentioned before, we didn't want to settle on our dream. And so when external circumstances changed, we would take those difficult decisions and continue to prioritize whatever was best with our life. So we already kind of talked a little bit about homeschool, of why we made those decisions. Skipping ahead a little bit to the beach, we didn't stay in fancy places or 5-star resorts. We were really meticulous about scanning through Airbnb and VRBO to find some really ridiculous deals on staying in condos and houses. And we very rarely ate out when we went on these trips. We just valued time at the beach and spending this time together. So we figured out that we could take these cheaper trips and have the ability to go more often, rather than living lavishly and doing it once or twice a year. And then with our loans, besides doing these beach trips, we were super conscious about where our money was allocated. So for a little while, we were paying for our kids' schooling, and we spend quite a bit of money buying high quality organic food. But besides that, that's about it. So we were throwing a ton of money towards our loans. But again, we realized that money wasn't going to make us happy. Just having the freedom and having the financial independence would be the best thing for our family in the long term. And this led us to this concept that I've got written up here called trading what you love for what you love more. In 2021, the housing market here in East Tennessee just went insane. And we loved our house that we lived in, but we realized once we had it that while the land was great, the house was much too big than what we needed. And we struggled for a little while. Do we want to sell this house and potentially find another place to either build or find a non-traditional home site? We're eventually wanting to do some kind of tiny home or semi-stable structure to live in. But we didn't know what we wanted to do. So after kind of praying and listening to ourselves, we had this big desire to say, hey, we're going to list our house very high above what we bought it for. And if we get any bites on it, then this was the time to sell it. And we ended up going camping that weekend, and within 48 hours after we got back, we had over a dozen offers that were even higher than our asking price. And by the time we closed on our house, after paying closing costs and negotiating a little bit on the roof, we ended up getting a check from the bank that was within exact $16 from the remaining $127,000 I had left to pay off on our student loans. So I say all that to say that sometimes the way that you envision something happening may not play out in the exact timeline or in the exact way that you think, but if you remain open to all the gifts that we have around us, things will end up happening in a way that I couldn't have ever possibly imagined. So I didn't know that the housing market was going to do what it did. We just knew we wanted to pay off our loans. We had a deadline of 2 years to do it. And like I said, we just went a little bit over 2 months of that, but paid our loans off and are living easy from that standpoint. And so why am I sharing all this stuff with you? I'm not doing it necessarily to brag, and I hope that it doesn't come across that way, but our family is nothing special. And what I don't think that is sometimes lost whenever I'm talking to people about this is we weren't lucky, and I don't think that we were genius in anything that we did. But what we realized, as many people have before me, is that we have much more control over our lives than we care to admit. This quote at the bottom is from Marianne Williamson, and I love it. It's, "Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. It is that we are powerful beyond measure." And then she goes on to say that it is our light inside, not our darkness, which most frightens us. Our society is set up very compartmentalized and wants us to kind of feel inadequate on our own. And if we do that, then we stay dependent on the system for goods and services, and that ensures that money exchanges hands for everything that we see around us. But an unfortunate byproduct of this is that it promotes this widespread discontent and unhappiness because we feel like that we don't have enough unless we have purchase A or know person B or go to place C until we can feel this whatever sense of fulfillment that we're lacking. But that mental and emotional disease that we internalize will spread out into our physical bodies. And when we are unsatisfied as a person, that leaches out into our peer circles, our friends and family, and then even further goes out into our society. And is one of the major driving reasons, in my opinion, that we see the most unhealthiest group of population of humans that have probably ever lived on this planet. And as physicians, this should really bother us because we all swore a Hippocratic oath, either literally or figuratively, to promote health to our fellow man. And if we can't even model this for our communities or even for ourselves, then where do we expect to find this catalyst for change? And how do we begin to heal ourselves? I believe this doesn't really come from any specific medical text, but this is going to come from each of us intentionally living our own lives. So I had asked Donna to send this out to you guys. I don't know if it came through in an email or not, but one of the questions I had was for you to try to think about what is your biggest dream in life, or what is the most important thing that you can do to live the best life that you can envision. This involves sitting down and taking time to figure out what makes you happy, provides passion, and it gladly steals your time and energy. And I'll go back to when I was kind of not really having a vision for my life. If you don't pick a dream, someone else in your life will do that, and you will start to follow along with it. And I promise you, whatever their idea of a life for you is, it's never going to be as good as the one that you pick yourself. And so if it's kind of daunting and you haven't really figured out a way to figure out, I guess, what your dream in life is, the best way to do is to reverse engineer this problem and find things that you're doing right now in your life that aren't serving you and brainstorm ways about how to eliminate them. So I'll give you a bunch of examples in my life. My dream that I've told myself for the last several years is I want to be the living embodiment of health, not only for myself and family, but for those around me. And so over the last 5 years, I found a lot of different incongruences from what I was saying that I wanted and how I was actually living. So I've broken numerous addictions to things like inorganic and processed foods, late night eating, pretty much all types of media, including television, smartphones, social media platforms, multitude of supplements, energy drinks, coffee, marijuana, over-exercising, overpacking my day, cutting back on my sleep, and basically a lot of ego-serving activities that I was trading for short-term comfort that were hurting me in the long run. But what I've found is each time I've broken one of these habits, I've been more liberated to be in tune with myself and my family. And I continue to do a lot of this healing work so that every day I become more and more fueled and inspired to connect to myself and the world around me. And I think regardless of the dream you pick, as you begin to live that life and bring that into fruition and creation, you'll feel the same way too. So all of those steps to do that, though, involved me rewiring old habits that I had and creating new ones. And the big thing with that people have to do is you have to grant yourself grace, because that takes both time and energy. And until I found the energy within myself to make these changes, I would just fail over and over again, which is really frustrating when you're earnestly trying to do something and it just seems like it's not happening. But the big key to that was this kind of arrow line I've made here. When you focus your thoughts on what you want out of life, it creates this internal desire for change. So our thoughts are more powerful than you can possibly imagine. We'll talk about that here in a second with the law of facilitation. But everything that's ever been created in this world, from every anesthetic drug you use to the computer screens that you're looking at to the light bulbs to cars, everything, all of that started as a thought in somebody's head. And that thought grew into desire inside of them to help create this thing or this place or whatever it may be. And that grew into them talking about it. So they talked about it to themselves. They talked about it to their friends, their family, to let them know, hey, this is something I'm truly passionate about and want to create. After that, they started taking action, and they may have worked and worked and worked on it. It's the old story of Thomas Edison failing a million times before he made a light bulb. It's you continue to do it because you have this internal drive and desire to make something that's going to better your life and the people around you. And eventually, you'll create it. And everyone has the power to do that. We just have to remind ourselves that we have that within us, just like everybody else does. And so I came across this idea of the law of facilitation, which is this neurophysiologic concept that pretty much anytime you have a repetitive stimulus we grease our synapses to be more efficient for that the next time we do it. So same way as you all learn how to intubate, the first couple times you do it, it's really scary. You're not exactly sure what you're looking at. And by now, I'm sure most of you guys can stick a laryngoscope blade in someone's mouth, and it is not daunting at all. Your body and brain immediately finds where you're looking for, and you can put an endotracheal tube in. So that's a positive neuronal pathway that we can create. But unfortunately, we make a lot of unconscious negative pathways through chronic negative self-talk. But just as you can learn how to do things in your life, everything from tying your shoes, riding a bike, up to practicing anesthesia, you can unlearn these behaviors if you put in intentional practice and try your best to change it. One of the other things I want to mention before we leave this slide is that your dream can literally be whatever you want it to be. It should be totally different from mine because we're all unique individuals. But the big thing is you've got to sit down and spend some time figuring out what truly is bringing you joy in life. Because if you don't, you may very well be living a much better life than you're realizing it, but you've never taken the time to think about it, and so you don't know if you've ever achieved it yet or not. So an easy place to start with this is with anesthesia. So how much fulfillment do each of you guys get from your work? Some questions to think about as you're going through residency is what parts of anesthesia are most fun for you? Do you enjoy sitting cases? Because there's plenty of jobs that you can work MD only doing that. Do you enjoy doing certain types of procedures? Do you enjoy managing rooms? Do you specifically enjoy a certain rotation or subspecialty? Once you figure that out, you can expand that into your personal life. So you know what kind of job you're interested in finding. Figure out where do you want to live? What kind of time off are you looking for? I think I had that on a slide earlier. I didn't mention it. So when I started my job, we had 9 weeks off a year and then had 2 days off post 24-hour call. We've rearranged that since then, and right now, basically, I'm working on a 3-on, 1-off schedule. So I get 13 weeks off a year, bookend weekends also where we're not working calls. So you can find whatever job you're looking for and make it fit your lifestyle. You just have to know what it is before you start looking. But going back to that, do you want to have a family? Do you want to be close to other special friends or family within your life? And then what hobbies do you like doing? If you're super into mountain biking, for instance, do you want to live near a place that you can go mountain bike every day when you get off of work? And there are literally thousands of jobs that you can find within anesthesia. And if you don't know what you want to do, every one of them are going to sound good because I promise they're going to pay better. You're going to have more time off than you do right now in residency, and you will become a victim of circumstance. I'm sure you guys can name several people who you've seen leave Cincinnati to go to a different job and end up coming back. Not necessarily that job was better or worse, and not to judge that person, but I bet you it sounded much better on paper than it ended up being, and they didn't know exactly what they wanted to do when they left. But if you can create that perfect dream job in your own mind and then seek that position out, you will find it every single time. And then last thing on this, don't be afraid to evolve your dream. So as you grow, you're going to change just the same way that our physical bodies have done it. All of us are different people than when we were 10 years old or 20 years old. And I hope to goodness that as I continue to grow and evolve, when I'm 40 and 50 and 60 and beyond, I am a much different person than I am now. And we can conceptualize that within our own bodies, that our cells and tissues regenerate all the time, but so can our mental and emotional capacity to learn. So as we are growing, don't be scared to separate from old thoughts or habits or behaviors just because they feel comfortable. If they're not serving you to live your best life or this quote unquote perfect dream, then figure out a way to get rid of them. And so you make more room in yourselves and in the people around you to live that life. And again, we have more huge announcements that Kimmy and I are going to do with our family coming up pretty soon. We just have to wait a little while to talk about them, but we're super excited about that as well. So this is kind of moving to a little bit different talk of where I think we've failed doing this within medicine and how I hope all of us can act as physicians in the future. So this quote at the top was said by Jesus to the people in his hometown of Nazareth. He was addressing concerns that the people at his time had of, if you are really the Son of God, why don't you show us that you can heal yourself? Which I think is a good question to ask. Most of us in life want proof before we trust others or ourselves with our time or money or whatever it is. We want to see that they embody the skill or habit that they're prescribing. So another way to say what Jesus said is, doctor, cast out your own demons before you come here and tell us how to live a better life. So when we care for patients, in my opinion, and I think in the opinion of most doctors, we're looked at and expected to be experts in healthcare. But somewhere along the line in Western medicine, our specialties became so compartmentalized that we've kind of lost this idea of forest within the trees. In the same way that we've compartmentalized our society, this kind of weakens us, I think, in a little bit, because we become so much robotic in what we are able to prescribe or talk about, and we get this kind of uncaring, disjointed, for-profit medical system. Martin Luther King had this quote at the bottom over 50 years ago that said, "Our scientific power outran our spiritual power, and we have guided missiles and misguided men." And that's a great thing in as far as an analogy to Western medicine, because we fell into this symptom-based care where a patient's going to come into us with a specific problem, and we're going to hone in on it, and we're going to try to give them an immediate solution without ever looking deeper underneath the surface to see what happened. So my example would be if someone goes into the hospital or to an orthopedic surgery center or clinic, they'll say, "I've got knee pain." They're going to go through a couple of range of motion tests, but they'll almost always get a knee x-ray ordered. They'll get an MRI. Once that comes back and nothing's really helping with physical therapy, they'll end up scoping that knee, and then down the line, they'll end up getting a knee replacement. But I don't know if anyone ever stops along the line to ask them what was the cause of that knee in the first place. You guys have pre-upped a bunch of people. I always hear from it that, "What happened to your knee?" "Well, it's my genetics," or, "Well, I wore out my knee." Our bodies are super amazing organisms that perform billions of cellular processes every day. They don't just wear out, and it's not always genetics. We are designed to live long, healthy, vibrant lives, but we have lost touch with our ability to analyze ourselves and to say, where can we optimize what we're doing on a daily basis, not just to be pain-free, but to live a super healthy, fulfilling life. And ancient physicians understood this pretty much from the inception of medicine, this idea to integrate the design of the human body. Hippocrates had this great quote on here that says, "Before you heal somebody, ask them if they're willing to give up the things that make them sick." Now, with anesthesia and a pre-op, I very rarely ask that, but if you've got someone coming in for multiple EGDs because they've got chronic acid reflux and Barrett's esophagus, very rarely does anyone go through a nutrition profile with them and ask them, "Are you sticking to these certain dietary guidelines to try to cut down on the inflammation you're causing in your body?" Your body's literally screaming at you saying, "Don't eat the food you're eating," or "Get more sleep," or "Calm down on some of these external stressors," because it is happening so much that I've lost tone of a sphincter and I'm letting acid shoot up in my esophagus. It's crazy. But people don't look at it that way. They look at it as, well, it's just bad genetics or bad luck or whatever it may be, and go on about their life. If you go back to look at the Hippocratic Oath, one of the things that it says, if you take a modern adaptation of it, is that I will prevent disease wherever I can, because prevention is preferable to cure. And so what is this prevention? I talked about this actually in my grand rounds when I was a resident, but there are these 4 pillars of movement, and Hippocrates talks about very similar things thousands of years ago, but it comes down to adequate movement, nutrition, sleep, and mindfulness. So thinking positive thoughts. And if we can't figure out how to do this for ourselves, there's no way that our patients are going to do it. So as doctors and as just humans that are alive, we really need to make health a #1 priority in our life. Because if we can model these prescriptions of movement, nutrition, sleep, and stress management, we can truly walk the walk for our communities as well. The first thing with figuring out what your dream is we got to figure out health incongruences from the way that we say that people should live and how we're actually living. Because the definition of insanity is continuing the same patterns and addictions over and over again, hoping that we're going to have a better outcome. It's the same thing as when you see someone come in with a glucose of 350 and their A1C is 11, who says, "I check my blood sugar sometimes, I wish it would go down," and they're getting their foot whacked off. Thinking about it, but actually not putting in the work to try to fix it is never going to help. And so Albert Einstein had this quote about, we can't solve our problems with the same thinking that we used when we created them. So we're going to have to figure out, how do we change this idea of claiming that we want to live better lives, but then continuing to fail at materializing it? So we go back again, I'm going to say this over and over. We've got to figure out what our dream is. And once we figure that out, then we look at these below factors to say, what is derailing our process, or our progress rather, to live out our full dream? And that's this idea of transmuting your fears into confidence. So when I think about this, I say these are about the 5 most common factors or stumbling blocks you're going to come along or around to whenever you're trying to figure out and realize your dream. So looking at time. How much time are you going to need to accomplish whatever your dream is? And where can you find that in your current daily schedule? As a resident, you all are super busy. And as an attending, I'm super busy. And unfortunately, just as an adult or as a human, we're all going to be super busy all the time, no matter what stage of life we're in. We all have the same 24 hours in a day, but we can prioritize the things that are truly important to us. And once you figure out this driving goal, other non-essential things are going to start falling away, because as you're pursuing greatness in your own life, you're going to realize they're not serving you. Going back to the idea of selling my house, I'm trading the thing that I love for something that I love more. So what I loved more was financial freedom and being able to not necessarily be stuck doing one thing with my family because I have to pay a mortgage, and to find a place that more suits us size-wise. Moving on from that one, going into energy. So you can create as much time as you want in the world, but if you don't have the energy to fuel your dream, it's never going to happen. So the example I give is if you want to run a marathon, but you can barely have enough energy to get from home to work and then to back home, you're never going to find this additional energy to start training to run. And so one of the concepts that's important to remember is it's going to take a little bit of energy to gain more energy. It's the same way that our digestive system works when we eat food. So it takes energy to break down the food that you eat, to absorb it, to shuttle it all around your body and get those nutrients in. But the goal is that you're going to end that process with a net surplus of energy after you eat. The same strategy can work on the macrocosm of our lives. We just have to go back to those 4 pillars of movement. We've got to figure out how can we move better, eat better, sleep better, and manage our stress better to gain that energy on the front end and use it to catapult and grow it and make it exponentially larger as we start pursuing our goal. One thing I will warn you about at this point, which I was super addicted to caffeine and coffee all through residency and up until about 6 to 12 months ago, is if you try to cheat this system with stimulants and coffee, all you're going to do is you're burning your adrenals out, and you're going to lead yourself down the pathway to illness, injury, eventually disease, and probably death if you don't get it under control. So there's no shortcut to this. You just have to put the work in just like everybody else does. The third category is going to be willingness. Are you really willing to follow the dream that you're stating to yourself, or are you following someone else's path? Do you really want to have a fancy car? Do you really want to have 6-pack abs? Do you want to have the 2.2 kids and the nice household in the suburbs? If you find yourself, once you've figured out what your dream is, lacking this internal desire and willingness to accomplish it, 2 things have probably happened. Either one, your stated dream is not an honest reflection of what you want. There's a biohacker, I don't know if you guys have come across, named Tim Ferriss, but basically he takes the 1 to 10 scale and says you should rank every decision you're making on that by already taking out the number 7, because number 7 is a pretty big cop out. It can be something that's kind of inspiring to you, kind of good, but it's not super exciting and it's not super terrible. Most everything would fall around that. So if you eliminate a 7 out of any decision you're making, and if you rate something of, do I want to pick up this extra paper assignment that someone wants you to write on in residency, or if it's, do I want to go spend my weekend traveling somewhere versus staying at home and resting, if it falls on that 1 to 6 slide, don't do it, because it's not really serving you in your overall goal of living the best life you can. If it's on 8, 9, or 10, it's probably pretty important to you, and you should at least try to do it. So that way you can see, were you correct in your thinking that this was going to serve you in a better way? And that's how you live a intentional life and grow and learn from previous things that you've done. So that's one thing that can happen. The other thing that may cause a lack of willingness is that you've just depleted yourself so much of your own life energy that you can't even conceptualize what a better life would look like. So either way, while you're figuring out what your true dream is, go back to visualizing and optimizing your own health. If you're that tired and down, which I've been that way too at times, and all of us will go through those periods, look at what you're doing. Are you eating well? Are you moving well? If you're on a super crappy rotation, like, I don't know, when I was a CA2 going through SICU, that was terrible. I could hardly sleep. But I at least tried to make sure that I was bringing healthy meals while I was there. You take control of the things that you can control and weather that storm, and it'll eventually ride itself out, and you're going to feel better and live better and have more clarity and thought to what you want in life. Going on to finances, how much money do you need to accomplish whatever your specific dream is? As physicians, we have the opportunity, and I highlight the word opportunity, to be financially wealthy. If we seek short-term comfort and keeping up with the Joneses and kind of just haphazardly spending our money on things that are kind of interesting to us but not really serving us, you're going to fall prey to the same societal pressures that anyone else can, and you're going to have a lot of debt and feel very much trapped in the job or situation that you're currently in. Use the blessing of the increased financial wealth that you guys are going to have very soon to hone in on, where can I allocate this hard-earned money to live my best life? And that kind of leads us into the last one, is equipment availability. So what do you need to have to fully live out your dream? So going away from my idea of health, which you can talk about, do you need gym shoes, a gym membership, a gym at your house, all those things. Say your passion is cooking. what kind of dream kitchen would you need to be able to bake or make whatever the foods are that you love preparing? What kind of other cutlery, refrigeration, utensils, and other food stuff that I really have no idea about? What would you need to do that? That's going to help you in two ways. One, it keeps you very focused and keeps you from getting derailed on your dream. And it makes future financial decisions more meaningful when you make them. You can get super excited when you buy whatever fancy, mixing bowl that you get, because to you, that is helping you express yourself in the highest way that you can. And so that's kind of reaching the end of this. I wanted to say again that being a resident is hard. You guys know that. Going through medical school is hard. All of life can be hard, but the big deal is to say you can take control over any situation that you're in. It just takes time and practice. So while I hope that this was a little bit inspiring and not too overwhelming, it's good to have mentors when you're learning new skills, just the same way as you guys have awesome attendings there at University of Cincinnati to teach you things. And I hope to kind of branch out a little bit from this and start teaching physicians and advanced level practitioners how to do these things in their own life. But just wrapping up, taking a holistic approach to your health from all the different pillars, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually, financially, and then just in your societal groups, you can create a better future for yourselves and then for medicine as well. So this is my contact information. We have a YouTube channel that we're just getting started. There's going to be more stuff popping up over there in the next month or two. That is my wife's contact stuff if anyone's interested in looking at her stuff on Instagram or her website. And that's all I have for you. So if you guys have any specific questions about intentional living or health and wellness practices in general, I'm happy to answer that. And then also, as an aside, I don't know how many people you guys talk to that are in private practice. I'm also happy to answer questions that you all have about picking a job and what it's like outside of the medical supervision or a medical direction model.